Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday night study, March 1st, 2023. Let's start within the news, especially this week. This is an article that says Transhumanism and the Mark of the Beast. And if you haven't heard about transhumanism, you need to listen up to it because it's definitely something coming. It's already here. With the rapid development of technology and the growing interest in transhumanism, many have started to wonder how it may relate to the Bible prophecy. Transhumanism is a philosophical, scientific, and essentially religious movement that seeks to merge humans with emerging technology. In other words, brain chips, and different things that will help us in a technological way to go beyond the human condition by genetic engineering, by the way. But so doing, transhumans believe that they can enhance our intellectual and physical capacities, transcend our biological limitations, including death, by the way, and create a more evolved species they call the post-human. Transhumanism is actively being pursued by prominent scientists and global elites. We've heard a lot about them. And is actually a vital component of the Great Reset proposed by Klaus Schwab, founder of the World Economic Forum, or the WEF. Many proponents of transhumanism advocate for the modification of human DNA to achieve their goals of enhancing humans, ultimately creating post-humans. The WEF recently stated that, quote, technology will become more intertwined with the body in the form of implants. These proposals are very interesting in light of the Mark of the Beast prophecy. As many of you are aware, implants have the potential to fulfill the mark in the hand or in the forehead, as described in Revelation chapter 13. Excuse me. According to Revelation 14, accepting the Mark of the Beast is a fatal decision with eternal consequences, rendering recipients unredeemable. Could it be possible that transhumanism will modify humans genetically to such an extent in the near future that they're no longer created in God's image, making them beyond salvation? The desire for human enhancement, including the eradication of diseases, the reversal of aging, and the extension of lifespans, among other things, may make the mark an appealing option for many. Transhumanism and the image of the beast. One such approach is the uploading of human consciousness into a robot to achieve eternal life. I know it sounds absolutely crazy, but the 2045 initiative anticipates this becoming a reality between 2030 and 2035. This initiative is especially interesting in light of Revelation 13, where the false prophet is said to bring an image of the beast to life, likely to be a form of an AI robot, as we've talked about before, or it's probably the climax of the false prophet's series of lying wonders the Bible tells us about. It is so convincing that people believe the image is truly alive or has consciousness, leading to an even greater worship of it, which is Revelation 13 to 15. Could it be that the false prophet will deceive humanity by claiming to have transferred the Antichrist consciousness into the image, when in reality it's powered by demonic forces, advanced AI, or some other means? Transhumanism efforts to create a post-human species could corrupt the human genome and disqualify people from redemption. What's our conclusion here? It is very possible that the emergence of transhumanism was prophesied in the Bible and will have a significant role in the future. Let me take a check for our systems for a moment. Excuse me. Are we okay? Okay. All right. Let me just give you something else that's coming on. This is another article today. Biden poking God in the eye. The U.S. enables the UN vote against Israeli settlements. I'm going to prophesy something to you. America is about due for some type, and I hope this doesn't happen. I hope I'm not a harbinger of bad news. But some natural disaster may hit America soon. Why do I say that? Because every time we go against Israel in the UN, or every time we diss Israel, something happens. I can give you 12 to 15 examples in the last decade how when we've gone against Israel, some natural disaster happened in America. This is the article. Forget the bromides about America's unbreakable bond with Israel and how the United States is Israel's greatest friend. Over the past week, the Biden administration has crossed two ominous red lines. For the first time in 6 years, the U.S. enabled a vote against Israel at the United Nations. We never do that. Supporting a UN Security Council statement condemning Israeli settlements. 8 days previously, Israel had legitimized 9 Israeli settlements that were erected without governmental approval. This was Israel's bullish response to the wave of recent terror attacks by jihadi gangs that the Palestinian Authority has allowed to proliferate in the disputed territories of Judea and Samaria. Legitimizing the settlements delivered the message that the more the Palestinian Arabs murder Israelis in order to force the Jews from the land, the more Israel will embed itself in the entire land. The Security Council promptly had a hissy fit. So did the U.S. State Department, which said it was deeply troubling. 4 days after the 9 outposts were legalized, the Biden administration crossed a new red line when it arrogantly presumed to tell Israel how to run its domestic affairs. Israel's judiciary reforms have absolutely nothing to do with America. They have no bearing on the Middle East and no bearing on the conflict. They are an internal Israeli issue. And the left-wing Bidenites think Israel must behave as the Bidenites want it to behave, because they assume that the military and financial support the United States gives Israel entitles them to tell Israel what to do. That's not actually true. Since America needs Israel as its principal strategic asset in the Middle East, it's the only democracy there. And it depends on its military intelligence, we do, and other such benefits. So America is trying to flex its muscle. The Bidenites deny the fact that the Palestinian Arabs aim to destroy Israel. Instead, they accuse Israel of provoking the Palestinian Arabs by settling the land to which Israel alone has legal, moral, and historical claims. A double standard has arisen over America's newly tough policy on supporting Ukraine. Speaking in Warsaw, Biden said, quote, "Autocrats only understand one word: no, no, no. No, you will not take my country. No, you will not take my freedom. No, you will not take my future. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, never," end of quote. Yet Biden doesn't say no to the Palestinian Arab autocrats. He doesn't tell them they'll never take the Jews' country. He'll never take Israel. He doesn't tell them that they will never have victory over Israel. Instead, he appeases them and subsidizes their murderous incitements. Yet while America believes this about Ukraine, it clearly doesn't believe it about Israel. It's a double standard, and America needs to wise up. Our Biden administration needs to wise up. You diss Israel and you go against Israel, and you get the wrath not of Israel, but you get the wrath of God. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. It's a fundamental principle of dealing with Israel, whether you're an individual or a country. And I believe our blessings have come from blessing Israel. I hope we go away from this standard that Biden is setting up. Let me give you a little bit on economy. And our economy, obviously, I've been telling you for months, is not very good. And I'm not really sure if everybody understands that fully. This article says this: Russia-China stranglehold on fertilizer may put world food security at risk. The world relies on fertilizers produced by Russia and its ally Belarus, as well as China, to produce many of its crops. The world does. A report recently at the Yahoo site explains, quote, "Just as semiconductors have become lightning rods for geopolitical friction, so the race for fertilizers has lured the U.S. and its allies to a strategic dependency for an agricultural input that is a key determinant of food security." And so our food, the world's food, is in jeopardy. The issue for the $250 billion global fertilizer industry was complicated last year because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ports were disrupted, shipping, banking, and insurance are more complicated, meaning ordinary deliveries haven't been reliable. Experts are estimating a 20% drop in food production because of the fertilizer industry issues. That should happen sometime mid-2023. Not a good scenario. Again, another article for economy. The economic nightmare that you've been waiting for is just beginning. Article after article, I give you week after week, talking about this economic problem. We know as we look at the future and we look at Revelation, that the economies of the world will topple. We know the Antichrist will beef them back up. We're watching some of those steps happening right now. This article says this: a lot of people out there have been waiting for the next major economic crisis to arrive. If you're one of them, you don't have to wait any longer, because it's already here. All the numbers are telling us that we haven't faced a downturn of this magnitude since 2008. On Tuesday, this past Tuesday, we learned that existing home sales in the United States have now fallen for 12 straight months in a row. It's the slowest pace since November of 2010, when the U.S. was still in the throes of a housing crisis triggered by subprime mortgage defaults. Overall, existing home sales are a whopping 40% lower than they were this time last year. We haven't seen anything like this since the last housing crisis. Excuse me. The median price of a home in the San Francisco Bay Area has already fallen by a whopping 35%. Home prices in the Bay Area have plummeted even faster than they did during the first housing crunch. But don't worry, Joe Biden says everything's just fine. Of course, the reality of the matter is that everything is not fine. As bad as things are for residential real estate, the truth is that things are even worse for commercial real estate. One of the biggest landlords in Los Angeles just defaulted on $755 million in loans. Brookfield Corporation, parent of the largest office landlord in downtown Los Angeles, is defaulting on loans tied to two buildings rather than refinancing the debt as demanded for space weakens in the center of the second largest U.S. city. Sadly, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We stand on the brink of the most epic commercial real estate crash in the entire history of the United States, and it's absolutely going to be devastating for the financial community. Meanwhile, the tsunami of layoffs that we've been witnessing just continues to intensify. Cuts at KPMG, that's the largest tax and audit providers for big business, will affect 700 people, their report says. And DocuSign is already on their second round of layoffs. On last Thursday, announced 10% of its workforce will be laid off, an additional 10%. The company said the latest cuts will impact about 700 employees. Even Apple is letting people go. Hundreds of contractors were suddenly given the axe by Apple last week. If even an extremely wealthy company like Apple has decided that now it's time to have mass layoffs, what does that say about the economic outlook for the rest of 2023? In 2022, we witnessed a wave of layoffs in the tech industry that wasn't like anything we've seen since the Great Recession. And so far this year, we are on the way ahead of last year's pace. The news comes after 1,045 tech companies last year fired 161,000 employees in 2022. But so far this year, 380 companies have fired 108,000 workers, according to the jobs tracking website. As economic activity slows down, major retailers are closing hundreds of locations all across the country. America is bracing for a mass exodus of retail stores across this nation, with more than 800 big box locations set to close from California to New York. Among the iconic names to announce they are downsizing includes Bed Bath & Beyond, Walmart, The Gap, and Party City. At least 803 stores are set to be shuttered over the rest of 2023, with many forced into desperate cost-cutting measures amid rampant inflation and declining bottom lines. Does anyone out there still want to argue that the economy is in good shape? Maybe liberal Democrats, but they'd be lying to you. Look, if the economy really is in good shape, then why is Walmart closing down more stores? Everyone is battening down the hatches because we're entering a really bad storm. Of course, not everyone is hurting. If you're in the top 10% of all income earners, you may still be doing quite well, for now. But at this point, the gap between the ultra wealthy and the rest of us is larger than ever. And most of the population is just trying to find a way to survive from month to month. Who do we have to blame? We have to blame our government. We have to blame the Biden administration, which cut the legs out of us in our energy, in the pipeline, which continues to shut down things that is vital to American security and American economics. One last one for there. Why are thousands of people moving from California to the interior West? That's not even a question. The question is, why aren't they? But there's thousands that are moving. Now, if you see this in the middle here, I don't know if it's showing up in color for you, but that yellow spot is where they're moving to. Vast throngs of people have been relocating from California and other coastal states to regions of the country known as the interior West, which you see on that map. The states of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and Arizona have all seen tremendous influx of new residents in the recent years. And this has especially been true since the start of the pandemic. And I'm not even going to tell you about Florida, which is the fastest growing state in the nation. So what's causing the mass exodus? Well, one of the most important is a growing consensus that our society is headed for big trouble. Millions upon millions of Americans can see that the events are starting to spiral out of control all around us. And they don't want to be stuck in a highly populated area when the big meltdown inevitably happens. People choose to leave California, but we have never seen people leave the state at a faster pace than we have during the last 2 years. California witnessed a sharp decline in its population in recent years. Listen to this, a whopping 500,000 residents leaving the state over the course of the last 2 years. Large numbers of these ex-Californians are deciding to relocate in the interior West. Utah's governor told reporters outside the White House Friday that California should stay away from the state. Utah is the fastest growing state in the nation for the past 10 years. He said, and much of the growth is coming from Californians fleeing the Golden State. Of course, he can't legally hold back or block ex-Californians from moving in. And so it's just going to continue to happen. Americans from all walks of life hate what is being done to our country. And they want to get as far away from the culture rot as they possibly can. A Ukrainian refugee girl, I think this says it all, settled in San Francisco with her mother, is finding public school in the city so violent that she longs to return to her war-torn country, where she feels children are less cruel to one another. Just think about that. California schools are so horrible, she'd rather face the possibility of being blown to bits by Russian missiles. According to Yana, the student, students interrupt classes, jumped on desks, cursed teachers. At first, Yana wondered what was going on, but then nothing happened. Students were not disciplined or prevented from repeat behavior. So now she wants to go home, but that's not going to happen for her either. Russian leader Vladimir Putin announced in a nearly 2-hour speech on Tuesday a unilateral suspension of the long-standing New START agreement that limits American and Russian nuclear development. That should scare everyone. He wants to get out of it. And the reason he wants to get out is because he's been threatening to nuke Ukraine. Putin also took the time to point out that, listen to this, the spiritual catastrophe in America, spending particular time on the Anglican Church for allegedly considering, quote, the idea of a gender-neutral God. Who in the world would have thought that Russia is sticking up for God and the West is abandoning him? If you think things are chaotic now, just wait till we get a couple more years down the road. Our society is in the process of unraveling all around us. And it won't be too long before the mass exodus of our heavily populated areas becomes a stampede. Speaking of war, let's talk about this. CIA chief. Iran could produce weapons-grade uranium within weeks. Thank you, Barack Obama. Thank you, Joe Biden. Iran can enrich uranium to weapons grade within weeks. But the United States does not believe Tehran has made the decision to do so, said the CIA chief William Burns on Saturday. That is baloney that they don't think they'll do so. Of course they'll do so. Burns was speaking to CBS News Face the Nation just days after the U.S. nuclear watchdog inspectors detected uranium enriched to the 84% in the Islamic Republic. By the way, all they need is 90% to have weapons-grade, military-grade bombs. To the best of our knowledge, he said, we don't believe that the supreme leader in Iran has yet made a decision to resume the weaponization program that we judged that they suspended or stopped at the end of 2003, Burns said in an interview, which airs in full on Sunday. That's the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard. Tehran wants weapons-grade uranium. They want a nuclear bomb. They want to take out Israel, and they will do it. They've said it over and over again as soon as they get that bomb. He continued, they've advanced very far to the point that it would only be a matter of weeks, so he's admitting it, that they could enrich to 90%. If they choose to cross that line, and also in terms of their missile system, their ability to deliver a nuclear weapon once they develop it has also been advancing as well. So he's admitting they can develop it in weeks and they can launch it. He said, but we don't see evidence that they've made a decision to resume that weaponization program because everything's hidden, everything's underground. But the other dimensions of this challenge, I think, are growing at a worrisome pace. So he's speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Earlier this month, the IAEA, which is the watchdog for nuclear weapons, chastised Iran for modifying the connection between the two groups of advanced centrifuges at its Fordow plant. So, in other words, they're not just spinning those centrifuges just for energy, nuclear energy. They're spinning it for weapons-grade uranium. A diplomat cited by Reuters implied that the 84% enriched uranium was found at the same site as the reconfigured cascades or clusters or centrifuges, which means they're going all ahead full. So what does Israel say? Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week said, rogue nations cannot be stopped from becoming nuclear powers. Netanyahu based his conclusion on the recent history of countries that pursued nuclear weapons. You had one, was called Saddam Hussein's Iraq. It was stopped by military force, ours. You had a second one, and by the way, he took out one of their nuclear plants before the Gulf War ever happened. You had a second one, it was called Syria, that tried to develop nuclear weapons, and it was stopped by a military action, ours. He took out the nuclear plant there. There was a third country, Muammar, Gaddafi's Libya. There's a fourth country, North Korea, that sought to develop nuclear weapons, and it wasn't challenged. They weren't stopped because there was no threat of military action. And so they developed the capacity, and they are now nuclear ready. Now we have Iran, he continued. Iran seeks to develop nuclear weapons. It was actually stopped for a year in 2003 when they thought, right after the Gulf War, when they thought that you, America, would take action against them. So they stopped, then converted their nuclear drive into a secret program, disguised by various civilian so-called research organizations. But they continued, he said. And even the sanctions, he continued, came about because Americans were saying, this crazy guy in Jerusalem, Netanyahu, is going to bomb them unless we do something. So that's how Iran came to the table and did a lousy 2015 nuclear agreement. These examples show that the only things to actually stop rogue nations from developing nuclear weapons are a credible military threat or actual military action, he said. Israeli media reported last week that following a series of 5 secret meetings, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu instructed the heads of Israeli security forces to significantly ramp up preparations for a strike on Iran's nuclear installations. I believe that's going to be coming in the next couple weeks. He will not wait for Biden, and nor does he need to. Let's talk about religion, Afghanistan, where faith is a matter of life and death. For many years, Afghanistan has been one of the top 50 most dangerous countries in the world to follow Jesus. In 2023, they were listed as one of the top 10 most dangerous countries. Once the Taliban forces took back control of Afghanistan in 2021 because of our fiasco withdrawal, the persecution of religious minorities has skyrocketed. We have abandoned Christians in Afghanistan. As a predominantly Muslim country, being open about your belief in Jesus will cost you your life. Christians are living in fear for their lives right now. Ben became a Christian in 2014 after exploring evangelical Christian websites and ultimately coming to faith in Jesus. Unfortunately, because his family was a Muslim household, Ben's news was not met with excitement, and he experienced his first of many tribulations. He was brutally beaten by his family, almost dead. Ben needed to act quickly. He crawled out of his hospital bed before they could kill him and fled in secret. He made his way to Kabul, the nation's capital, with the intent of finding safety and moving forward with his life. Ben was able to connect with a local house church, where he quickly became friends with the pastor and his family. They supported him and provided him with wisdom and resources to grow in his newfound faith. But the Taliban was still hunting down Ben specifically, till one day. Taliban terrorists entered the house church. They murdered the pastor, his 2 children, one of Ben's friends, and another Afghan boy. Then a suicide bomber blew up the church. Ben survived, but he was devastated. He went underground. He tried over and over again to get out of Afghanistan. Finally, when the U.S. quickly abandoned Afghanistan in 2021, the sudden foreign policy had a profound impact on all religious minorities living discreetly. Many Afghan Christians had managed to keep their identity a secret, but Ben's faith was known. And tragically, Ben's family, loyal to their Islamic faith, exposed their own son to the Taliban. He knew he had to get out of the country. Ben was a high-profile target. Ben would find true permanent home in Canada with the help of something called the Shia Fund that helped Christians escape. There, meeting with a house church of other Afghan Christians, growing in his faith, pursuing God's plan for his life. Even now, Ben's whereabouts are a real identity, and real identity cannot be discussed or disclosed for fear that those who would locate him and kill him for his faith. So we're watching some really strange things go on. Let me tell you a little bit about moral decay. Last two articles. Dangerous social trends. The rise of the angry young single male. Have you noticed that a lot of young men seem to be angry, bitter, and frustrated all the time? It isn't your imagination. There are really millions upon millions of young men that are in a state of deep discontent because they can't find love. Number of available single young men greatly outnumbers the number of available single young women in America today. In fact, it's being reported that single young men are unattached at nearly twice the rate that single young women in the United States are. More than 60% of young men are single, nearly twice the rate of unattached women. Men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, friendless, and lonely. They stand on the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that affect all young men. Roughly 50% of all adults are male in America, and 50% of young adults are female. So how could there possibly be such a gap? Unfortunately, the rules of the game have dramatically changed. In the old days, the goal was to find love at a relatively young age, get married, and raise a family together. But now, having children is not a high priority for many women. In fact, there are many women that don't want to have children at all. Instead, financial considerations have become a lot more important in this day and age. Unfortunately for young men, older men tend to have more financial resources than they do. One study found that employment was one of the most important factors for women when evaluating potential partners. Many women are extremely hesitant to get involved with someone that makes less money than they do, or that has less education than they do. But now that women earn almost 60% of all bachelor degrees, you heard me right, 60% of all bachelor degrees, that's become a major problem. Because now the number of college-educated young women greatly outnumbers the number of college-educated young men. So a lot of young women that are searching for someone on their level are turning to older men. Survey after survey has found that young women are generally much more liberal than young men are. So that makes it very difficult for conservative young men to find desirable partners. Since Gallup began measuring LGBT identification in 2012, another reason, the percentage of traditionalist baby boomers and Generation X adults who identify as LGBT has held relatively steady. At the same time, there's been a modest uptick among millennials from 5.8% in 2012 that had LGBT identification, when some members of the generation hadn't even reached 18 yet, to 7.8% in 2017 and 10.5% currently. But for Generation Z, there's been a huge explosion. In 2017, 10.5% of Americans Generation Z identified as LGBT. By the same time we got to 2021, that number has skyrocketed to 20.8%. This is what our rot of our society and our culture has done. Of those that identify as LGBT, nearly 3/4 are bisexual. And approximately 3/4 of those that identify as bisexual are women. This certainly helps to explain why there are large numbers of the young men that can't find relationships. Sadly, at this point, a lot of single men have simply given up on finding love at all. Only half of single men are actually seeking relationships or even casual dates, according to Pew Research. That figure is declining. So many men are deeply frustrated, and sometimes all that frustration can lead to tragedy. Boy, this will connect the dots for you in a moment. In the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Younger men are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend some researchers link to their growing social isolation. The societal trends that have caused this crisis are likely to intensify in years ahead, and that's not good at all. The enemy has really done his job. And lastly tonight, I found this very interesting. Let me ask you a question. You can answer this yourself under moral decay. NFL or NBA? Let me read you the stats. 36 have been arrested on spousal abuse. 7 have been arrested for fraud. 19 have been accused of writing bad checks. 117 have bankrupted 2 or more businesses. 3 have done time for assault. 71 can't get a credit card due to bad credit. 14 have been arrested for drunk-related issues. 8 have been arrested for shoplifting. 84, that's right, 84, have been arrested for drunk driving in the past year alone. 21 are presently defendants in lawsuits. So what do you think it is? National Football League, the NFL, or National Basketball Association? I'll ask the guys that are here just to raise their hand. National Football League or National Basketball? Football. Well, it's neither. It's the 435 present members of the United States Congress. No wonder we're in such a mess. That is in the news for tonight.